Hello and welcome to a Paradigm Shift in Use Taxes webcast. I'm Lindsay and I will be facilitating today's session. Our presenters today are Brian Wilczewski, Michael Galila, and Susie Sue. Before we begin, I'd like to make some announcements. Note the audio options available to you in your invitation. You can listen through your computer or telephone. If you prefer to use the telephone audio, please review your confirmation or the webinar login screen for dial-in details. While viewing the webcast, note the full screen button available to you in the upper right. This button toggles to a full screen view of the presentation. It provides a better view, but just note that you won't see the other pods, such as the Q&A, when you are in full screen view, but you can always toggle back and forth. We will offer a PDF of today's presentation at the conclusion of the webcast. This file is provided for future reference. Today's webcast is being recorded and we will not be opening the phone lines for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, simply enter them into the field in the Q&A pod at the bottom and press enter. Please note that we may not be able to respond to questions until the end of the presentation, or we will follow up by email at a later date. That concludes today's announcements. Let's get started. I will turn it over to today's first presenter, Brian.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. My name is Brian Wilczewski. My role here at Vertex is managing our relationship with SAP and working closely with our Solution Center to develop new and exciting solutions for our SAP customer base. Also on the call today from Vertex is Michael Galila. Michael manages our SAP Solution Center, which provides SAP expertise and develops SAP-specific solutions for the base. As we go through the webinar, Michael will add color commentary as required. I'm also pleased to introduce Susie Sue, a founder of LCR Dixon, who will be walking us through the majority of today's webinar agenda. As a focus of today's webinar, Susie will dive into the procure-to-pay process, examining challenges and solutions, and then taking us outside the presentation to show us some of the technology available to help. As Lindsay said, as we move through the presentation, feel free to type in questions. Those that we can address in line, we will. And of course, as a part of the agenda, we will leave time at the end to cover those questions in the Q&A. When we talk about technology, it's important to talk a little bit about Vertex strategy with respect to our SAP solutions and Vertex O-Series. So as you see on the diagram here, it's composed of three core parts. We've had a long relationship with LCR Dixon. We formalized a partnership on the solution side in late 2014, culminating in the availability of the Tax Accelerator in 2015, as you see there in blue. Since then, the Accelerator has become a core part of our O-Series offering to the SAP channel. And those of you that have purchased O-Series in the last year probably well aware of the Accelerator and its offerings. The focus of today is not to go into the Accelerator, but to focus on the green circled there in terms of the plus tools. That being one of the key parts to the strategy, there are these tools, the plus tools by LCR Dixon. This will be the focus. As far as our relationship with LCR regarding those plus tools, Vertex has the ability to resell those tools to the customer base. A third key component of the strategy is activation and implementation services. These are key from a Vertex and LCR perspective to be able to support the value and the results of the technology. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie to take us through the next part of the webinar here.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Hopefully this will be a useful session for you. Just to give you some background to myself and how we got started at LCR Dixon, I co-founded this company about 10 years ago, and I started it with an SAP developer by the name of Jeff Beecher. And prior to that, we'd worked together for many years on a number of SAP projects. I was formerly with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their Western region doing implementations, working primarily with SAP customers. And I found that all of our SAP customers had a very similar set of issues that they were dealing with, and especially on the use tax side, which is why we're going to focus on the procure-to-pay cycle today. We're going to talk about some of the issues that we see typically coming up in the procure-to-pay cycle, both before and after the tax calculation, and how we can help you address those gaps. The way that we view it is the cycle is not just a matter of implementing a tax engine and basically dealing with it as part of the procure-to-pay cycle. Our approach is to kind of work upstream and look at some of the most typical issues and gaps that are needed, not only for tax departments, but also for those teams that you rely on, whether it's buyers, procurement folks, requisitioners, and AP folks, as well as the downstream people in accounting. So there's a number of areas that we view as being very cross-functional, and that tax is just part of that ecosystem. But what we want to focus on first are some of the pain points, and I think that's what's brought a lot of you to the session today, is about some of the pain points on the use tax side. And some questions that you probably deal with on a day-to-day basis are, are you having to spend too much time on correcting or reviewing the tax results on your AP invoices? Do you find yourself having daily interaction with the AP folks having to ping you and ask you questions about, hey, what do I do about this invoice? Or the vendor billed me this, Vertex calculated that, what do I do? And so if you're spending too much time on that, having to correct those taxes during AP processing, then that's an indication that there's definitely room for improvement in that process flow. The other is, and this is a very common issue, is are you challenged with the bad data being entered on the purchase orders and even before that on requisitions as people are buying things? Because what happens is a lot of times what we need is that data to be very correct in order for us to figure out, okay, what is it we're buying, where is it going to, how is it being used? So we have dependency whenever we're automating the use tax process and using Vertex to do that. We have a dependency on the data coming in to be correct. And when it's not, then that results in potential errors in our tax calculation. So what we find a lot of tax departments end up doing is having to train the procure-to-pay teams on how to choose material groups, how to choose GL accounts. And this is a constant cycle of training, monitoring, follow-up, and of course there's an inherent error ratio that comes about with the bad data coming in through your upstream documents. So that's definitely a challenge that we see a lot of companies experiencing. The second is related to audits, the third is related to audits. And this is about getting the data you need for your audits, whether it's audits from taxing authorities or reverse audits that you might be doing, or even your own internal management audits where you might want to monitor your transactions and determine what's occurring with them. So it's very difficult to get all the data you need in one place in order to be effective with your audits. So if that's an issue that you're struggling with, stick with us today because we'll be able to kind of talk about some of the areas that we can help make more efficient there. And then finally, at the end of the day, do you just have ongoing errors, whether it's underpayments or accruals or overpayments or accruals in tax? You can put in an automated solution, but if there are gaps or process issues or data problems, you could still have ongoing liabilities and overpayments. And so certainly that's an area that we're looking to close the gap on that to make sure that your accuracy is as high as possible. So as we walk through some of the problems in the procure-to-pay cycle, we see basically 7 steps in the cycle. And the first step is basically when data gets created. So we have Vertex there in the middle, and then you've got around it the procure-to-pay processes. And data is one of the first points because where you have master data such as GL accounts or material groups or cost centers getting created, that's the beginning point of your automation cycle. The second step is as you've got requisitioners out there buying things. And you may have hundreds or even thousands of requisitioners that are out there logging requests to buy things, whether it's services or widgets or a combination of. That's basically part of your core operations, of course. Now, the third step is as those requisitions get created and turned into purchase orders in SAP, then we have a touch point with Vertex. We have basically the ability to call Vertex and estimate the taxes on those purchases. So we may want to know what those taxes are for purposes of budgeting and planning. We may want to know what the taxes are so we can notify our vendors on what taxes to bill us. So there's definite value and benefit for estimating taxes on your purchase orders. And as we move through the cycle to step 4, now we're talking about your AP invoices. And a lot of purchases, you may know, go straight to AP invoice where you don't have a purchase order, you have what's called an FI invoice, or the purchases that you make through POs, they will come through the AP cycle as well. Now we're finding more and more companies are implementing automation around AP, where we don't have users keying in and starting invoices manually. We're seeing more and more companies deploying AP automation programs to automate the process of turning vendor invoices into invoices in SAP. So we're definitely seeing a trend toward that being more touch-free, and of course that's going to create some downstream problems as well that we'll address. And then step number 5 is having to do adjustments after the fact. Now this can be a fact of life for tax departments where you need to be potentially reviewing and correcting your accruals or making adjustments, reversing them. Perhaps you've got certain processes out there that you can't really handle through the automation cycle that you need to do manual adjustments for. And then step 6 of the cycle is your returns, which of course you're filing returns every month or quarter or annually. And then step 7 of the cycle is defending those audits, where you could be defending a transaction that happened 3 or more years ago. And so that is the end cycle, end step of the cycle of your procure-to-pay audit, procure-to-pay cycle, and that is basically being able to have the accountability to the taxing authorities on justifying the amount of tax that you did pay or accrue. So as we look through each step of the cycle, we see some problems, and these are problems that you may be experiencing today. As we talk about master data, one of the issues that we see tax departments struggling with is knowing when that gets created in SAP. You may have a dependency on knowing when material groups get added or when GL accounts get added. You may want to know when plants or cost centers or company codes get added so you know where you need to be registered. And so an issue we see is the tax department may not be notified every time something is added in SAP that they need to be aware of. The second problem in the cycle comes about as you've got requisitioners out there buying things, and they're coding their requisitions potentially with the accounting data and with things like the material groups or the commodity codes of what they're buying. Well, these folks are the first step of your tax decision because they're making decisions about data that then is going into Vertex to make a tax calculation on that. And so if they're not coding things correctly, then that has follow-on impact where your tax results may be wrong, your tax decision could be completely off because of the material group or GL account being selected. Problem number 3 we see is during PO creation is not having a tight enough integration with Vertex. When you make an investment in Vertex to automate your use taxes, you want to make sure you're calling it on all the transactions that it should be. And POs is one point where users can actually, if they're not in check, they can override the call to Vertex. They can do something called changing the tax code. They can blank out or bypass Vertex by doing that. And we see companies struggling with the control issue with that. So that can certainly be a problem, is triggering that call to Vertex appropriately. And the second problem during PO processing is making sure that we're sending the right data over to Vertex so we can calculate taxes correctly. The fourth issue we see is around AP processing, and when we're using Vertex to validate our sales tax paid to vendor or the use taxes that we owe, sometimes what we find is that that calculation in tax doesn't match what the vendor's billing. And in SAP, that may cause the invoice to not post, and then a user has to step in to manipulate that invoice to post it. So what this requires is training for the AP team on the different scenarios, so they can be trained on knowing when to pay a vendor's bill, when to accrue the taxes, when to short pay the vendor potentially. And so having to train them and also interrupt their flow with that affects productivity for everyone, both in the tax department and in AP. The fifth major problem that we see is around the fact that the tax department, when you have to do adjustments and do manual accruals, that can be very time-consuming and messy. But also, if you start doing manual journal entries in SAP for your use taxes, they don't necessarily flow to the Vertex tax journal. So then you end up with issue number 6, and that is recons, where you're going to have different numbers posting to your GL versus what's posting to Vertex. And so one problem can lead to another problem. As you can see, this is a cycle where you can have upstream problems creating downstream problems as we go through here. And then, of course, when it comes to audits, one of the biggest challenges that we see for companies is getting all the data you need in a simple report. There's many different data sets throughout SAP with different tables where all the pieces of data that you might need for an audit could be across dozens of tables. And so it's quite difficult for a lot of companies to write the queries or get the custom reports that are needed to facilitate your audits. So these are all the issues we see in the 7 steps of the procure-to-pay cycle. What we're going to talk about shortly are how we resolve that using the Vertex LCR solution set. And a lot of why we do have an issue here is we've got a balancing act between the procure-to-pay priorities and between tax priorities. On the left side here, procure-to-pay, their focus is to support operations and make sure that materials and services are procured in a timely manner and that they process their documents to represent that with speed and accuracy. And so simplicity is very important for the procure-to-pay team. We don't want to overburden them with excess decisions, complex scenarios around taxability. We want to make things simple for them. And so that's going to be their focus. Now, the focus for the tax department is accuracy. We've got to make sure we get the right results in terms of the taxes that we pay and accrue. We need to be accountable for that, and we also need an audit trail. So we need to be able to show why we paid the taxes that we did and make sure that we're able to justify that when we do come under audit. So as we deal with that balancing act, sometimes you might find that one area leads another, but what we have found, it is possible to achieve that balance where everybody's happy and everybody wins. So that's where this paradigm shift comes about, and Brian sort of alluded to this at the beginning of the session, where there are multiple pieces to this pie now, and it's not just about implementing a tax system, which Vertex O-Series is a highly advanced global enterprise tax application, and it connects to SAP at multiple points to automate your tax compliance and your decision process. But we also recognize that there's a number of things up on the SAP side that need to be handled in order to make sure we get the best out of Vertex, and also to make sure that we're not burdening those upstream teams with too many manual decisions. So that's where the Accelerator steps in, and there's a couple of programs within the Accelerator that will help automate the tax code default process, will allow you to be more flexible in your data mapping so you can be more fine-tuned about the data you send from SAP to Vertex for the decision. And then the Accelerator also contains a very extensive suite of pre-developed reports, which is really important for a lot of tax departments to get the visibility to the transactions, the taxes, everything that you need from a recon and an audit standpoint. So those are all part of the Accelerator, and that's what we view as being the baseline solution that we put in SAP to address the most common gaps. Then there's a third part of the pie here, and that's where the plus tools come about. This is an a la carte menu of programs that you can choose to license through Vertex, and what these do is they address very specific issues, and I'm going to touch on a few of these in my demo later, but one of the most popular ones is Vendor Recon. What this does is it automates the reconciliation process between vendor billed taxes and Vertex estimated taxes. So if a vendor doesn't bill you enough tax, we can accrue the difference. If a vendor bills you too much tax, you may have it short pay, or you may choose to pay the vendor as billed. So Vendor Recon gets installed in SAP, it gets invoked during the AP process, and it automates that balancing process so that you don't have to have your AP folks do it. It also works very nicely with a lot of the AP automation programs so that when you have a model where you don't want users touching the invoices as much, Vendor Recon fits very well with that, as well as working with Vertex to automate the tax calculation and then automate the handling when we compare that amount to the vendor tax. We've also got a program called FlexRFC Tax AP. What this does allows you to very easily process your tax-only adjustments. So perhaps every week or month you may be reviewing your AP invoices, and you may see some that you have to adjust where you've got to reverse out the use taxes, or you need to make those use taxes before month end. And so oftentimes that's a very manual review and posting process. So the FlexRFC program lets you very easily process those very quickly and be able to not only keep SAP up to date with those adjustments, but also to be able to update Vertex with those as well. Third program in the plus tool list there is Flux Monitor. What this does is it monitors for changes in master data. so that if somebody adds a material group or a cost center or GL account, you can set triggers to be notified about that. And that way you can be aware if something gets added. You can then figure out if you need to change any of the setups in Vertex. If you might need to add Nexus somewhere, or you might need to get registered, or you might need to map a material group to a Vertex category. So those changes will be sent to you. You can have a scheduled job where the Flux Monitor reports come to you to tell you everything that's changed in SAP that would impact your tax compliance needs. Number 4 there is the diagnostics program. This is a pretty exciting tool, and this gets back to control. You know, one of the things that we see a lot of tax departments struggling with is you're pretty much reliant on a lot of the upstream processes and data, and then you have to sort of after the fact review and correct. Well, diagnostics helps you with doing that analysis, but it also lets you take control back over bad data inputs, and this is one of the big challenges around use tax automation. So I'll give you a little insight into how we can do that with diagnostics, where even if users are putting in bad or wrong material groups, you can actually have that get corrected in the calculation call with Vertex, so that we can have the right tax calculation even when bad data is entered on the purchase order or invoice. And then finally, the other program that we deploy on the use tax side is Flex Tax. What this does is it fills a gap around procurement cards or around allocations, expense allocations, or basically any type of transaction where you need to make a use tax accrual and you've got a load file that you can base it on. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a CSV file, it could be a P-card report, where you want to send those transactions out to Vertex to figure out if we owe use taxes on it. We may owe an incremental use tax on it. We may want to distribute use taxes among different states where we're expensing software, for example. So you can load that into Flex Tax and have that call out to Vertex, figure out a use tax, post that use tax in SAP, and update the Vertex tax journal at the same time. So this is the quick overview to the different components of, you know, whether it's O-Series, Accelerator, or the Plus tools and how they address issues. So if we look at it in the context of our problem wheel here, where they basically map to is your Flux Monitor can be used to monitor master data, so the tax department can be aware of anything affecting their taxes. Diagnostics can be deployed to address the big issue around bad data coming into your requisitions and purchase orders, and having to address that more proactively. The Accelerator has the tax code default and the data mapping feature within it, so you can have the call made out to Vertex on purchase orders more reliably, and you can send correct data over. We've got Vendor Recon, which will be invoked during AP processing to automate the tax discrepancies between vendor and Vertex. We've got Flex Tax and Flex IRC in order to allow the use tax accruals on procurement card or allocations, and then also to enable tax adjustments on previously posted invoices. And then we've got Accelerator addressing the returns and recon issue. We've got some great recon tools within the Accelerator that can let you reconcile between your SAP GL and your Vertex numbers, so that as you're preparing your returns, you can take a very quick status of the tax amounts between both SAP and Vertex and compare them very quickly. And then finally, we've got diagnostics. And what this is our analytics program that really helps you support audits to facilitate the steps that you need to take to get data to an auditor, analyze or export vendor invoices, and be able to predict and identify errors in your audit population. So why don't we take a look at the programs now and just give you a sense on how they look and feel. So I'm going to share my SAP screen here, and what we have here is basically the programs, whether it's the Accelerator or the Plus tools. These get deployed in SAP. So the way that you will access them is through your SAP menu. They have, you will have a custom transaction code in order to access your Plus tools or your Accelerator tools in SAP. And what I wanted to give you a quick peek into is starting with the diagnostics program. One of the things that we want to talk to you about today is about taking control back. And part of taking control back is being able to have really good visibility as to your transaction spend and the tax results, and being able to respond to errors or anomalies that you might find more proactively. And this is an area that a lot of tax departments struggle with. So I'm going to start with diagnostics here. This is our program where you can run some analytics on your AP activity and get a sense on how accurate your tax decisions are. Are you getting your expected tax decisions? And then also being able to see what it is that's going into the documents and driving your tax results. Because many of you probably deal with thousands of purchase order or invoices lines that could be processed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And it's really difficult to be able to keep tabs on everything. So this gives you some visibility to be able to see that at a micro and a macro level. So I'm going to run diagnostics for a period of time. I want to look at all my AP invoices, and I want to get a sense on whether or not my actual results for taxability are matching my expected. So as I execute my diagnostics program, it's going to do some analysis for me. And it's telling me that I'm analyzing a certain number of company codes. It tells me how many line items I'm analyzing. It tells me how much spend is in my population, and this includes any taxes that I've paid or accrued. And then it tells me what my tax base is, and then how much tax I've either paid or accrued on that. So I get a sense on what my rough effective tax rate is. I can also see from this a percentage of how much of my spend I've potentially overpaid on. And diagnostics can do some analysis where we can load in a matrix of what our expected results are. And then what we do is we bounce up your actual results against that. And we can flag cases where you've paid or accrued taxes on items that should be exempt, or vice versa. Perhaps you haven't paid or accrued taxes on items that should have been taxable. So we can do some analysis and tell you what your rough error ratio might be. So in our system, it looks like I've underpaid on about $360,000 here, which is about 1.6% of my spend. It also looks like I've overpaid on about $121,000, which is just over 0.5%. So my overall accuracy from a tax decision standpoint is a fairly decent 97.7%. So I can get a sense of how effective my overall tax automation solution is, not just how Vertex is working, but how everything else is working with Vertex. How's the data looking? How's, are we calling Vertex appropriately? Are we getting the expected results in our actual? So this gives you a good sense of that. And you can monitor that and see how that changes over time. And we've certainly seen that with companies that before and after they've deployed Vertex, their numbers in terms of accuracy could be way lower, and then after you deploy Vertex could jump up quite significantly. So this is a great way for you to, for your own peace of mind and also for management to be able to justify and show what it is that your tax system is doing here. So that's a quick summary there. Now, if I look at the detail here, we've got line-level AP detail. And so this report actually has 200 fields in it, and it's based on the Accelerator AP detail report. We actually read the same data. But what I like to do is sort of compress things so I can just see a summary of the key elements that I care about here. And so as I kind of go from left to right here, I've got my document number. Here's my ship-to state. I know what tax code it posted with. Here's my vendor. This is my expense account. This is my material group, and this is my PO line text. And we've done a lot of analyses around these, and we see that a lot of times this PO line text can be very insightful and actually tell you what's being purchased. So we like to bring that in and take a look at that and kind of line that up against some of the other data to see if they're in line or not. I've also put in some attributes for my cost center. Here's my base amount. Here's my total tax amount for the line that I've either paid or accrued. And then we translate that into a taxability of T or E. We then compare that against our matrix of T or E. And if they don't match, then it's going to flag us and tell us. So in this case, we've got cases where we have paid or accrued taxes on something that should have been exempt and that we've potentially overpaid or accrued. If they do match, you're going to see them nicely green lighted here. And then if we've potentially underpaid or accrued, you're going to see them in yellow here. So we have nice color coding to give you a very quick visual on, which line items are potentially overpaid in terms of taxability. The other cool thing that this program has is if you have your vendor invoice images attached to your SAP invoices, you'll see a little icon here. And so you can just double click on that, and that'll pop open the PDF invoice, which would be great if as part of doing your review, you want to take a look at the vendor invoice. It'll be right there. Okay, so that's one cool thing. The other great thing is, and this is going to help you for audits, is that when you need to export all of those invoice images for an auditor, all you need to do is just highlight your line items, click on Output Attachments, and then you can save these invoice images off to a directory. So we recently benchmarked this with a company that deployed diagnostics. They were basically spending about 6 weeks. They had a temp come in and pull all the invoices manually out of SAP and save them into a directory. It took them about 6 weeks. Well, they deployed diagnostics and they ran the invoice output attachments program, and they basically pulled about 10,000 invoices in just over 60, I think it was 75 minutes. So they basically replaced 6 weeks of work with 75 minutes using diagnostics. So this is a great tool if you're looking to kind of cut down the time you spend on audits and getting invoices together for an auditor, whether it's reverse audits or tax liability audits. Being able to save off your vendor invoice images is a very important component of that. So this will help you cut down that time significantly. You can also double click and drill down to the SAP invoice here as well if you want to take a look at that. And then we've also got some other cool features here, including Google search. So for example, a lot of times when you're reviewing your spend and you don't quite know what a vendor does, you want to Google that vendor. So what you do is you just double click on the vendor name, and that'll Google the vendor for you automatically. Same thing with your PO line text. You may be trying to figure out what this is here. Just double click on it, and it goes to Google the vendor. I'm sorry, what the PO line text is. So this is a pretty nice feature. As you're doing your analysis, you might want to kind of use that. And again, it's saving you keystrokes and time when you're doing your audit review here. Okay, and some other cool features with this, and kind of getting back to being able to take control, is when you're reviewing your spend activity, you might observe cases where users are putting in bad data. And whether it's, because there's simply no material group or GL account that's appropriate, or maybe they just choose the wrong one, that does have follow-on impact for us in tax. And so that's a problem. And short of going back and having to train all those users time and time again, what we've done is allowed you to have visibility to that and to flag those bad data inputs so that you can not only be aware of them for reporting and training purposes, but more importantly, you can actually set some rules where you can correct that data going forward in the calculation process. Let me show you an example of this. So I have a line item here. Looks like it's for my HBK engineering. So it's an engineering firm based on what I Googled. And it looks like based on this line text here that they're doing some sort of in-store labor for me in my San Francisco office. And it looks like it's been put to my material group as services, so they've done a decent job there. But the GL account is office supplies. And I know that that's probably not what we're buying here. So in our system, when we're using GL account as part of our tax decision process, that's going to cause us a problem. So we want to trigger a flag on this. And what I'm going to do is drill down, and I'm going to create a flag on this. What I'm able to do is basically set some comments on it. I can put it into a certain bucket for reporting. I can set some triggers and define, based on the certain account here. Perhaps it's based also on my vendor. And it may also be based on a keyword. And this is a very powerful feature here, where I can drive an outcome based on a keyword in a text field. And by virtue of me seeing the word labor, I know that we're not buying office supplies. So what I can now do is set an override in my GL account that gets sent to Vertex for the calculation. So even if somebody puts in the office supplies, the incorrect office supplies account, in the call that goes out to Vertex, we can send the corrected GL account. And what this does is enables us to get the right tax decision even with the bad data inputs. This is a very important part of being able to take control of your tax decisions. And the nice thing about this is that you don't necessarily change the GL account or the material group on the PO or the invoice. What you're doing is simply changing the data that's being sent to Vertex. And so we're getting the right tax calculation even with bad data inputs. The implications of this are phenomenal and very positive. One being that you don't have to go back to train the buyers and requisitioners as frequently. The second thing is you don't have to go back and change purchase order data. A lot of times when you find errors, you have to go back and get the PO to change the material group so that we can get the right tax calculation. We won't need to do that anymore because basically what we're doing is we're able to correct that data using the diagnostics program. This connects to the Accelerator data mapping feature, and it's basically a feature we call data fix. So it's a very powerful tool and gives you visibility to bad data inputs. You can do reporting on this, but more importantly, it gives you the ability to control those tax decisions even with bad data inputs. So this gets back to one of our key problem areas, and that's garbage in, garbage out. Here you have the ability to resolve that garbage before it becomes problematic. Okay, so after you create these rules, you're able to have visibility to them. You can run reports and see where the rules apply. You can see the transactions that they apply in as well, which is very powerful. So I've basically created that rule one time. What it did was it went and found approximately 9 other line items that hit this same rule. And so I'm able to see also which rules apply, what my triggers are. And also very importantly is when data fix applies to correct the data, you'll have visibility to that as well. We basically store any kind of override that we do to things like the GL accounts or the material groups. We store that in separate set of tables and give you visibility of that. So you've got a nice audit trail when data fix has done a correction. You've also got the ability to see some phenomenal pivot tables and have the ability to do more aggregate analysis. So we've got some seeded pivot tables that are built into the program. You can generate them. And what it does, it gives you visibility to, for example, I'm able to run a very quick pivot table here. I'm able to see where my errors occur. So I've got my wrong GL account error. I can see exactly which POs it's appeared onto. I can see which invoices it has appeared on as well. And then, because I've got user IDs in my data set as well, I can see the users who created those purchase orders. So you have visibility to the users that might be creating the POs causing the problems. This may help you with fine-tuning your training message. And it also just gives you visibility to materiality, where you may have particular users processing big dollar invoices that are resulting in some tax errors. You have some great visibility to that. So this is a great feature in statistics. It's all part of diagnostics. And again, it's just giving you visibility and control again, so that you don't have to wait until you get audited 3 years down the line. You can view this daily. You can view this weekly. You can get phenomenal visibility, see what's coming in, and be able to make your future corrections with it. Now, I also want to point out that you can use our programs to make corrections on previously posted invoices. You may, as part of this analysis, see that you've overpaid or overaccrued taxes on transactions. You may be under-accrued on others. So what you can do here is run some filters and filter by your outcome here. So let's say if I want to take a look at all of my overpaid. Okay, these are all my red lines here. I can simply highlight those line items there, click on my Flex RFC button, and this opens up our Flex RFC AP program. What this does is it takes all the line items there that we had the over accruals on, brings it into the staging screen, and now I can go and process adjustments to reverse out those taxes. I can do it with a couple of clicks here. So I can simply hit the Submit All button to process reversing entries for all of these, or I can just do a couple at a time where I might want to just process one and take a look at it. Now when I process an adjustment here, it does a couple of things. One is it creates an accounting document to reverse out that tax that we may have overaccrued. It reverses it out of the cost center and the GL account of the original invoice. It references the original invoice here, and it also does a simultaneous update to the Vertex tax journal, so that when you process these adjustments, it's very easy for you to see not only them in SAP, but you can also see them in the Vertex journal, so that when you're filing your returns, that these adjustments are flowing through your O-Series export files that go into your returns application. So this keeps both your SAP GL and your Vertex journal in sync with those adjustments. So it's quite a powerful tool in not only being able to see and identify your over and under accruals, but to very quickly be able to process the corrections in them. And what's very important for a lot of tax departments is to do it in the same posting period as your original invoice. So with these tools, we're able to review things much more efficiently without as much, manual reviews or without having to wait for IT to build your custom query. You're basically more in a self-help kind of model here where you can review, analyze, correct all very quickly and efficiently here. So that's effectively how diagnostics and FlexRFC can work together in order to give you visibility to your errors and to make the corrections as well, which is a really important part of taking control back. The other nice thing is because of these tools, you lessen some of the impacts on your upstream teams. So because you're able to control the tax decisions more accurately here, you don't have to spend as much time on training the buyers and requisitioners and giving them a hard time about putting in GL accounts or material groups. When you're able to do the corrections here, you can control things more, more in an automated fashion without having to rely on as much manual training and input. So this is a quick view as to how you can kind of address the cycle, the procure-to-pay gap cycles. Certainly, we'll be happy to spend any time, reach out to your Vertex rep if you want to see these tools in more detail. We'll be happy to give you a demo if you need them. But at this time, we'd like to maybe open it up for any questions, or Brian or Michael, if you have any other comments you want to jump in at this point, that would be great.
Susie, this is Brian. Thank you, Susie. Before we get into Q&A here, and as we change the screen a bit, I do want to say thank you again to Susie. Hopefully everyone on the call here today, the webinar, has heard, there is a new way or a paradigm shift, as Susie talked about, to be able to solve or provide more value to your tax processes within your department, a shift that lets you take control. This shift, as was mentioned and hopefully you've seen, involves a combination of technology and solutions, both the Accelerator and the Plus tools that Susie walked through and has said. Both these are available from Vertex and LCR Dixon. So as you want to learn more, do ask, please reach out to Vertex to find out more. But what I wanted to highlight while you're all thinking of potentially some other questions you want to ask, and I do see there are some in the queue, but I'll give a couple more minutes for anyone who's sitting on one right now to type those in. I did want to highlight some upcoming events from Vertex perspective. And so what you've seen today, we will obviously be available at these events to talk more about, but external SAP events, you can see there, 2 SAP financial shows both in the U.S. and Europe over the next few months, as well as Vertex will be down at the SAP Sapphire event. So if anyone on the webinar is attending those, do feel free to stop by our booth. And for customers on the line, we always do like to talk about our Vertex Exchange conferences, which are designed for our customers to come learn the latest about our solutions and meet our Vertex folks and interact in a fun setting. So 2 events coming up there this year for those. So with that, there are a few questions in the queue. We'll go to Q&A. And Susie, you can see the questions.
I do. I see one question
sure.
about if there's any line limitations on AP diagnostics. And so we don't have any line limitations on what can process. Certainly we see different performance with different companies' systems. I recently did about a 300,000 line analysis. It ran in about 10 minutes. So from the time that I executed the analysis to the time that it came back with all of my results, 300,000 lines took approximately 10 minutes to run. Just to give you one sense of benchmarking. Certainly we will probably see different performance depending on the database that you might be running on the back end. We certainly see that companies that are running on HANA database will experience much faster performance times as well.
Thank you, Susie. Also, a question came up, is Vertex hosted locally or in the cloud? There's multiple deployment options for Vertex. It is, there is an on-premise version. The Vertex, we also offer a hosted model we call Vertex On Demand. And as we move through 2017, you'll all see more from Vertex perspective around a SaaS offering from Vertex as well as we move through 2017. So do appreciate that question. Michael, are you on the line still?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, Michael, if you want to address and answer, I see the third question here from a max tax perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Vertex does support max taxes, tier taxes, quantity-based taxes. I wasn't sure if the question was coming from a plus tool, but as far as the engine itself, it handles all different tax methodologies. So whether it's a single level tax or a tier or a simple max tax, Vertex certainly handles it and supplies the rules for the certain jurisdictions that apply a max tax.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I see one more question come up
Sure.
regarding diagnostics and whether or not when it does the data fix, does it change the data on the transaction itself? It does not. So basically the purchase order or the invoice, whatever data was entered remains on there. It's just that what we do is we change the data that gets sent behind the scenes to Vertex for the calculation. That's the part that we manipulate with the diagnostics data fix feature. We don't actually change the data on the transaction itself.
So I'll give a few more seconds for any more questions. There is one at the end of the presentation here. These slides will be available. I do see a question on that. So as we get to the end here. So we'll give the last few seconds and for some questions here, but I'll put up our contact information. If you do have any additional questions that you think of afterwards, please do reach out. And Susie, there's one more question in the queue.
Yeah, certainly. We focused on the procurement discussion today, but certainly we addressed the taxes on the sales order and the billing side as well, both from a Vertex standpoint as well as from many of the tools. Not so much diagnostics at this point. We're in the process of releasing diagnostics, though, to assist on the SD side, but that's not been released at this time for general release. But there's a number of tools that do address the sales order side, including things like the Accelerator reports. There's a couple of reports that handle the sales tax side, the sales billing, and the AR side, as well as we do have a tax adjustment program on the sales side for companies that experience a high volume of tax-only credits that they have to process. We've got a Flex RFC program that allows you to very easily process your tax adjustments for wherever you've inadvertently charged taxes to customers and you need to just refund the taxes. So those are just a couple of the programs that we have on the sales side as well to facilitate some of the gaps we see in order to cash. Okay, and I do see another question actually. It's just related to what I mentioned there about being able to block transactions. And this question actually comes up from a VAT standpoint. So those of you who deal with global taxes in the VAT world, that we've seen companies sometimes want to block a transaction, especially on the sales side, from posting because it's invalid, meaning that from a VAT standpoint, there may be an invalid combination of perhaps where it's shipping from or to or who the buyer or seller is. And so this is actually a new feature that we're rolling out with diagnostics. It'll be an add-on for VAT. And what it's going to do is facilitate blocking SD transactions from posting for combinations where you might deem them inadmissible from a VAT standpoint. So this will, help you with your compliance to ensure that, I guess, what we could call illegal transactions from posting, again, giving you control upstream to prevent any bad transactions from posting. So this is a new feature we'll be adding to diagnostics, and it's not out for general release yet, but it is certainly getting ready for that.
Great. Well, at this point, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. I do want to thank everyone for joining, and a big thank you to Susie for her time today to walk us through all that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to give some instruction to everyone on how to get the slides. Thank you all.
Thank you, Susie, Michael, and Brian. This concludes today's webcast presentation. If you do still have any last-minute questions, you can enter them in the Q&A pod at the bottom, and we will follow up. As a final thank you for participating, we are offering a PDF of today's presentation available for download. On behalf of our presenters and Vertex, I want to thank you for your participation today. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.